3 days after we buried my grandfather, my lawyer told me to lie to every single person in my family. Tell them the 3.8 million is gone, she said. Tell them there's nothing left. I thought she was crazy. Turns out she was the only sane person in my life. Because the moment I said the money was gone, someone I loved more than anyone started playing a game I never saw coming. But I need to back up. My phone rang at 6:47 on a Wednesday morning. I know the exact time because I was standing in my kitchen on Congress Street in Portland, Maine, staring at my coffee maker like it owed me an explanation for existing. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours. My eyes were swollen. I was wearing an oversized Celtics shirt I'd stolen from an ex-boyfriend 3 years ago and never given back, and my hair looked like something a seagull would nest in. I hadn't even poured my coffee yet. 6:47. My mother's name on the screen. Patricia Voss. Not Patricia Ellison anymore. She dropped that last name the way she dropped most things that stopped being useful to her, quietly and without looking back. I picked up because when your mother calls 3 days after you've buried the man who raised you, you assume she's calling to ask how you're holding up. You assume there's softness on the other end. Maybe a crack in the voice? Maybe an "I've been thinking about you." That's not what I got. What I got was, "Have you talked to anyone about Dad's house yet?" Not, "How are you, Nora?" Not, "I know this is hard." Not even a breath of acknowledgement that Theodore Ellison, the man who taught me to read, who kept first editions in a glass cabinet and called them his other grandchildren, who smelled like pipe tobacco and old paper and something warm I've never been able to name, was 3 days in the ground and still fresh in the dirt. She wanted to know about the house. The house in Cape Porpoise, waterfront, 4 bedrooms, built in 1926 with a wraparound porch and a view of the harbor that made real estate agents lose their composure. My grandfather had lived there for 31 years. He died in the bedroom on the second floor with the window cracked because he liked hearing the waves, even at the end. And my mother, who hadn't spoken to him in 3 years, wanted to know if it was still on the table. I should tell you why they stopped talking. It wasn't complicated. My mother asked my grandfather for $35,000. She needed it for Dale's business, she said. Dale Voss, her second husband, the one she married 14 months after my parents' divorce was finalized. Dale ran a small real estate agency out of Scarborough. Needed capital to expand, open a second office, hire another agent. My grandfather said no. Not because he didn't have it, but because he'd already lent Patricia money twice before, and neither time had a single dollar come back. She didn't take it well. There were words. There was a Thanksgiving where my mother told everyone that my grandfather was getting difficult, that his mind wasn't what it used to be, that it was sad, really, watching someone like that decline. He was 81 at the time, and doing the New York Times crossword in pen every morning with a mechanical pencil he kept in his shirt pocket. His mind was a cathedral. She just didn't like what it had decided. 3 years of silence. No calls. No visits. No birthday cards. Not even when he had the first stroke, the small one that took his left hand's steadiness, but not his spirit. Not even when the second one came and took everything else. But she showed up to the funeral. Oh, she showed up. She arrived in a car I'd never seen before. A silver SUV, dealer plates still on it, that new leather smell probably still clinging to the seats. Dale was driving. He wore a charcoal suit and a tie that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. And behind them, stepping out of the back seat in shoes that were absolutely not meant for cemetery grass, was a man I didn't recognize. Mid-50s, expensive watch, the kind of posture that suggested he'd never carried his own luggage. I didn't know who he was. Not then. My mother had her hair done. Fresh color, blown out, the kind of appointment you book 3 days in advance, which means she booked it the day after my grandfather died. She wore black, but it was the kind of black that costs money. Tailored, a silver brooch on the lapel that caught the October light. She hugged me at the cemetery and said, "He's in a better place, sweetheart," and her perfume was so strong it nearly erased the smell of turned earth and dying flowers. I'm not saying she dressed up for the reading of the will, but I'm also not saying that. My father was there too, Glenn Ellison. He stood near the back, hands in his coat pockets, looking at the ground the way he always did when he didn't know what to say, which was most of the time. He'd driven down from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where he ran a small boat repair shop. He and my mother hadn't been in the same room in 6 years. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He didn't approach Patricia. He didn't approach me either, not right away. He just stood there, existing in the periphery, which was where Glenn Ellison had existed for most of my life. After the service, people came through my grandfather's house with casseroles and paper plates and the kind of forced laughter that funerals produce. Dale went upstairs. Said he was checking the bathroom plumbing, which is a thing nobody does at a funeral unless they're looking for something else. The man in the expensive watch stood by the mantel, studying the room like he was appraising it. And Patricia floated through it all, shaking hands and accepting condolences like she was hosting a cocktail party. So when she called me 3 days later at 6:47 in the morning asking about the house, I shouldn't have been surprised. But I was. I told her I just buried my grandfather. She said she knew that, but these things move fast and they needed to know where they stood. Where we stood. The woman who hadn't stood anywhere near Theodore Ellison in 3 years suddenly needed to know where she stood. Dale's voice leaked through from the background. He wasn't even trying to be subtle. "Ask about the house," he said. "The waterfront property." The waterfront property. Like it was a listing. Like my grandfather's home, the one where I learned to read on the porch swing, where I hid candy in a secret drawer and thought I was the most clever kid alive, where the hallway still smelled like pipe tobacco and lemon furniture polish, was just a line item on a spreadsheet. I told my mother I'd call her back. I didn't. I sat at my kitchen table in my apartment in Portland, still in that stolen Celtic shirt, and stared at my phone for a long time. My coffee got cold. I didn't touch it. The radiator in my apartment clicked the way it always did in October, a dull metallic tapping that sounded like a clock counting down to something I couldn't see. Then I picked up my phone and called the only person I had left. She answered on the second ring. She always answered on the second ring. Not the first, because that would mean she'd been sitting there waiting. Not the third, because by the third ring you've already started composing the voicemail in your head. The second ring. Every single time. Like she had some internal radar that told her exactly when I needed her, and she'd already cleared a space in whatever she was doing before I even hit the call button. "Hey," that's all she said. One syllable. But the way she said it, soft and steady, like a hand reaching through the phone, told me she already knew something was wrong. My sister, Hazel Ellison, 27 years old, 5'4" with dark hair she always pulled into a messy bun when she was working and let fall past her shoulders when she wasn't. She had our grandfather's eyes, this warm amber brown that looked almost gold in certain light, and his habit of tilting her head slightly to the left when she was really listening to you. Not pretending to listen. Actually listening. Hazel was a nurse at Maine Medical Center in Portland. Night shifts mostly, 12 hours on her feet in the surgical recovery unit, the kind of work that wrecks your back and your sleep schedule and your faith in the durability of the human body, but she never complained about it. She'd come home at 7 in the morning, peel off her scrubs, eat a bowl of cereal standing over the sink, and sleep until 2 in the afternoon. Then, she'd get up and do something kind for someone. That was just how Hazel operated. Kindness wasn't an effort for her. It was a setting. She lived in a studio apartment on Monjoy Hill, the east end of Portland, where the rent was $1,350 a month for a place with exactly one closet and a kitchen so small you couldn't open the oven and the fridge at the same time. She'd moved there after things ended with Ryan, her fiancé. They'd been together 4 years. He'd proposed on a Tuesday in the parking lot of a Dunkin' Donuts, which Hazel thought was hilarious and perfect, and so Ryan it hurt. Then, 10 months before the wedding, he decided he wasn't ready, packed his things, left her with the apartment deposit, the student loan payments for nursing school, and a ring she returned the next day without crying, at least not in the store. She never talked about Ryan unless I brought him up first, and when she did, she'd just shrug and say something about how at least she didn't have to pretend to like his mother's potato salad anymore. That was Hazel. Sharp, warm, self-deprecating in a way that made you forget she was carrying anything heavy at all. But here's what mattered most about Hazel. The thing you need to understand before anything else in this story makes sense. For the last 2 years of my grandfather's life, Hazel was the one who showed up. Every Sunday afternoon, without fail, she drove 45 minutes up to Cape Porpoise and sat in my grandfather's study with him. They'd pick a book from his collection, something old, something with a cracked spine and yellowed pages that smelled like dust and possibility, and they'd read together, sometimes out loud, taking turns with chapters. Sometimes in silence, side by side in matching leather chairs that creaked every time you shifted your weight. Teddy loved those Sundays. He told me once that Hazel reminded him of my grandmother, who died before I was born. He said they had the same way of making silence feel like company. But it wasn't just Sundays. Hazel was the one who drove Teddy to his cardiology appointments in Biddeford when his hands got too shaky to trust behind the wheel. She was the one who filled his pill organizer every Thursday because he kept mixing up the blood thinner with the cholesterol medication and couldn't tell the difference because both pills were white and round and, in his words, designed by people who clearly wanted to kill old men slowly. She was the one who stocked his fridge with the brand of orange juice he liked, the one without pulp, because he said pulp in orange juice was a form of betrayal. When the first stroke came, the mild one in March that took the steadiness from his left hand, Hazel was there within 40 minutes. She stayed the night in the hospital chair, the kind that reclines but never enough, and she held his hand while he slept. When the second stroke came in September, the one that took everything, Hazel was already at the house. She'd come for their Sunday reading. She found him on the floor of the study, halfway between his desk and the bookshelf, a copy of something by John Cheever still open on the arm of his chair. She called the paramedics. She rode with him. She sat in the ICU for 11 hours and didn't eat a single thing because she said her stomach was a fist and nothing was getting past it. He died at 4:17 in the morning. Hazel was holding his hand. She was always holding someone's hand. At the funeral, she stood next to me and didn't let go until I told her I was okay. Even then, she kept her pinky hooked around mine, like a tether. Like she was saying, I'm still here even if you don't need me to be. And when I called her that Wednesday morning, 3 days after the burial, voice cracking, barely holding the pieces of myself together, she didn't ask what happened. She already knew. She could hear it. "Forget about Mom," she said. Her voice got that edge it got when she was angry on someone else's behalf. "She's been like this our whole lives and she's not going to change now. You and me, Nora. We have each other." That's what Grandpa would have wanted. I believed her. I believed her completely. The way you believe the floor will hold you when you step out of bed. The way you believe the sun will come up. Not because you've tested it, because the alternative is unthinkable. Hazel had been through her own wreckage. The broken engagement, the student loans that sat on her shoulders like a second skeleton, the $13.50 a month studio with the tiny closet and the oven that fought the fridge for space. She never asked anyone for anything. She just showed up and showed up and showed up until showing up became the thing you loved most about her. I loved Hazel. I trusted Hazel. Hazel was the good one. Remember that. It's going to matter. 3 days after that phone call, I drove 2 hours north to Kennebunkport to meet with a woman who was about to rearrange my understanding of human nature over a cup of black coffee. The drive up Route 1 in mid-October is the kind of thing Maine puts on postcards. Foliage blazing in every direction, burnt orange and deep crimson, and that particular shade of gold that only exists for about 2 weeks before the wind strips it all bare. I passed the outlet malls in Kittery, the lobster shacks in Ogunquit with their hand-painted signs and picnic tables stacked for winter, the stretches of coastline where the Atlantic crashes against rocks like it's trying to make a point nobody asked for. Any other day, I might have rolled the window down and let the salt air do its work. That day, I drove with both hands on the wheel and my jaw clenched so tight my molars ached by the time I hit Kennebunk. Margaret Calloway. Maggie. If she liked you. She'd been my grandfather's estate attorney for 11 years. Handled everything from the property taxes on the Cape Porpoise house to the insurance on his book collection to a boundary dispute with a neighbor in 2017 that apparently got heated enough to involve a surveyor and a strongly worded letter about a lilac bush. Her office was on the second floor of a converted Victorian on Ocean Avenue. The kind of building where the stairs creak in 3 different pitches depending on which step you hit, and the radiator in the hallway makes a sound like someone tapping a small wrench against a pipe every 35 seconds. I counted. It's what I do when I'm trying not to think about the thing I'm actually there to think about. The door had a frosted glass panel with her name in gold letters that were peeling slightly at the edges. Inside, the office smelled like old wood and black coffee and something faintly floral, maybe lavender. Maybe just the memory of it. Bookshelves lined every wall. Legal volumes, mostly, but also a few novels wedged between the case law like stowaways. I spotted a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird between a property code manual and something about probate reform in New England. It made me like her before she even opened her mouth. Maggie was 58, short silver hair cut close to her head in a way that said she had better things to do than spend time on her hair, reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, a gray cardigan with a coffee stain on the left cuff that she either hadn't noticed or didn't care about, and in her hand, a chipped ceramic mug that said, "World's Okayest Lawyer." I liked her immediately. She didn't start with small talk. She didn't offer condolences or ask how I was holding up. She pulled a manila folder from her desk drawer, set it in front of me, opened it, and said, "Let's get into it." The estate totaled $3.8 million. She said it the way a mechanic tells you your transmission is shot. Flat, factual. Like the number was just information, and what mattered was what came next. The house in Cape Porpoise, appraised at $720,000. Waterfront, 4 bedrooms, original 1920s bones, with enough updates to keep the insurance company happy. The property alone would have been a life-changing inheritance. But that was just the beginning. The book collection, my grandfather's pride, his obsession, the thing he loved almost as much as he loved people. First editions, signed copies, rare prints, Hemingway, Fitzgerald, a signed Faulkner that Maggie said a dealer in Boston had valued at $43,000 by itself. The entire collection was stored in a climate-controlled facility in Portland, professionally cataloged and insured. Total appraised value, $1.6 million. I blinked at that number. I blinked at it several times. My grandfather, the man who wore the same corduroy jacket for 11 years and drove a 2004 Subaru Outback with a dent in the passenger door he never fixed, had a book collection worth $1.6 million. He once told me the books were his retirement plan, and I thought he was joking. He was not joking. The rest of the estate was split between an investment portfolio, savings accounts, and a whole life insurance policy. All of it. Every cent. Every book. Every square foot of that house and every wave that crashed against its shore left to one person. Nora Ellison. Named specifically. No ambiguity. No conditions. No splits. My brain did that thing where it refuses to process information. Like when someone tells you gas is $5 a gallon and you just stand at the pump staring at the screen like it's written in a language you used to speak but forgot. I looked at the numbers on the paper and they looked back at me and neither of us knew what to do with the other. Then Maggie said the thing that changed everything. She set down the mug, the world's okayest lawyer mug, with its chipped rim and its coffee ring stain on the desk beneath it. She set it down like she was clearing the stage for what came next. "I need you to call your mother," she said. "Call your father. Tell them your grandfather left you nothing." I laughed. The kind of laugh that comes out before your brain has finished deciding whether something is funny or terrifying. Maggie didn't laugh. Her face didn't change. She looked at me over the top of her reading glasses with an expression that had 23 years of estate law behind it and none of the patience for nervous laughter. "Tell them the estate went to debts," she said. "Tell them there was a donation to the Kennebunkport Library Preservation Fund. Tell them whatever story feels natural. But tell them there's nothing. Not a dollar. Not a book. Not a shingle on that roof." I asked her why. She leaned back in her chair. The leather creaked. The radiator tapped. 35 seconds. Right on schedule. "Because when people think there's no money," she said, "they show you exactly who they are. And when people think there is money, they perform." She'd been doing this for 23 years. She told me that like it was a warning, not a credential. 23 years of watching families come apart at the seams over assets. She'd seen siblings stop speaking over a set of silverware. She'd watched a son contest his mother's will over a paid-off Volvo. She'd sat in rooms where people who'd held each other at funerals turned into strangers with lawyers the moment someone mentioned a bank account. She wanted me to see who showed up for me when there was nothing to gain. And more importantly, she wanted me to see who disappeared, or worse, who stayed for the wrong reasons. I sat with that for a minute. The radiator tapped. Maggie drank her coffee. The October light came through the window and hit the frosted glass panel on the door, scattering the gold letters of her name across the opposite wall like confetti at a party nobody was having. She was asking me to lie to my family. And somewhere in the back of my brain, in the part that still smelled like pipe tobacco and old paper, I heard my grandfather's voice. Not his words, just his tone. The one he used when he was about to teach me something I didn't know I needed to learn. "Okay," I said. Maggie nodded once, picked up her mug, took a sip. "Good," she said. "Now let's talk about how." That night, I sat cross-legged on my bed with a pint of mint chip ice cream balanced on my knee, because apparently that's how grown women make life-altering decisions, not at a desk, not in a quiet room with a glass of wine and soft lighting and the kind of composure you see in movies when someone is about to do something brave. No, on a twin bed with a duvet that hadn't been washed in 2 weeks, in an apartment where the ceiling had a water stain shaped like Rhode Island, eating ice cream straight from the container with a spoon I'm fairly sure I'd already used for peanut butter that morning. I stared at my phone for 11 minutes. I know because the microwave clock was in my line of sight and I watched it change from 8:41 to 8:52 while my thumb hovered over my mother's contact like it was a detonator. Then I called. Patricia picked up on the 4th ring. She answered the way she always answered when she was expecting something, with her voice pitched slightly higher than normal, bright and ready, like a game show contestant who just heard her category. "Nora, honey, I've been thinking about you." No, she hadn't. I told her I'd met with Grandpa's lawyer. I told her the estate had gone mostly to debts. Outstanding medical bills from the hospital stay, back taxes on the property, a lien from a contractor who'd done roof work 2 years ago. I told her the remainder, what little there was, had been donated to the Kennebunkport Library Preservation Fund because Teddy had been on their board for 15 years and apparently cared more about first editions than first heirs. I said there was barely enough to cover the funeral costs. I said I was sorry. The silence on the other end lasted about 5 seconds. 5 seconds is longer than you think when you're holding your breath and listening to someone decide which version of themselves to be. Then my mother started crying. And look, I know what crying sounds like when it's real. I grew up with this woman. I've heard her cry when the dog died, when her mother passed, when Glenn left. Real crying has a raggedness to it, an ugliness, a sound like something tearing that you can't control. Real crying doesn't care how it looks. My mother's crying that night sounded like she'd rehearsed it in the shower, measured, musical, almost. A rising note of disbelief followed by a careful tremor followed by a sniffle timed perfectly for maximum effect. She had cried over discontinued nail polish colors at CVS with more conviction than she cried over this. But the tears weren't the part that got me. It was Dale's voice in the background. He wasn't even trying to whisper. I could hear him as clearly as if he'd been holding the phone himself. And what he said, in that flat, transactional tone of his, was, "Ask about the house. The waterfront property. Find out if it's part of the debts." The waterfront property. Again, like the words had been sitting in his mouth since the funeral, waiting for their cue. My mother, still performing the tears, her voice cracking in all the right places, asked me about the house, whether it was included in the debts, whether it was going to be sold to cover what Teddy owed. She said the word owed, like it tasted bad, like the idea that her father might have died with obligations instead of gifts, was a personal insult. I told her I didn't know yet, that Maggie was still sorting it out, that these things take time. She said to find out. She said the house was worth something, that Grandpa wouldn't want it going to strangers. Strangers. The woman who hadn't set foot in that house since before the pandemic. The woman who hadn't called her own father in 3 years. The woman who'd borrowed $35,000 from him and treated his request for repayment like a declaration of war. That woman was worried about strangers. I told her I'd let her know when I knew more. She sniffled one last time for good measure and hung up. Dale didn't say goodbye. I doubt he even knew I could hear him, though I suspect he wouldn't have cared. I ate 3 more spoonfuls of ice cream. The mint chip had started to melt around the edges, that soft halo of green liquid pooling against the cardboard. I let it. Some things are better when they're falling apart. Then I called Hazel. She picked up on the 2nd ring. Of course she did. I told her everything. The call with Patricia, Dale's voice in the background, the performance crying, the waterfront property comment. I told her, and I could feel the anger building in my own voice like a wave gathering offshore, getting taller and darker and closer with every sentence. Hazel listened to all of it without interrupting. She had this way of being silent that wasn't empty. You could feel her on the other end, absorbing it, her jaw probably tightening the way it did when she was furious on your behalf. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she made a sound, half sigh, half something sharper, and said, They haven't changed. They're never going to change. Mom's been like this since we were kids, and Dale just gave her a bigger stage to perform on. She told me I deserved better. She told me to stop expecting Patricia to be something she wasn't, that it only led to pain. Her voice cracked a little when she said that, and I could tell she was thinking about her own disappointments, the ones she carried quietly and never put on display. Then she said something I want you to pay attention to. You know, she said, and her voice got softer, almost dreamy. Grandpa always said that house deserved someone who loved the sound of the waves as much as he did. He told me that once, sitting on the back porch, late summer, right before sunset. He was drinking that awful instant coffee he liked, and he said he hoped someday someone who actually appreciated it would live there, someone who understood what it meant. A pause. He never said who, Hazel continued, but I always thought, I don't know. I spent a lot of time there. Those Sundays meant everything to me. She trailed off. Let the sentence hang in the air between us like a leaf that hadn't decided whether to fall yet. It was subtle, like a feather landing on a table, like a door opening half an inch, just enough to let a sliver of light through, but not enough for you to see what's behind it. At the time, sitting on my bed with melted ice cream on my knee and my mother's performance still ringing in my ears, I thought Hazel was just being sentimental. I thought she was missing Teddy. I thought she was sharing a beautiful memory because that's what sisters do when the world is ugly and you need something soft to hold on to. Now I know she was planting a seed. My father called for the first time in 4 months. He didn't know what to say, which honestly was the most honest thing about him. Glenn Ellison was not a bad man. I want to be clear about that because this story has enough villains, and he wasn't one of them. He was just absent. Not in the dramatic, walked out and never looked back way. More in the slow, quiet erosion way, like a shoreline losing sand one tide at a time until one day you look up and the beach you remember is just not there anymore. He and my mother divorced when I was 14 and Hazel was 13. Patricia got the house. Glenn got the boat repair shop in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and a studio apartment above a bait store that smelled like low tide regardless of season. He called on birthdays. He sent checks at Christmas, always for odd amounts, like $47 or $63, like he was calculating some internal equation of guilt and affection and coming up with numbers that satisfied neither. That was Glenn, present on paper, missing in practice. So when his name showed up on my phone on a Thursday afternoon, about a week after I'd spoken with Maggie, I nearly dropped my coffee. I was sitting in the parking lot of the orthodontics office where I worked, eating a granola bar from the bottom of my bag that was either 2 weeks or 2 months old, and I answered mostly out of shock. Nora. Long pause. The sound of something on his end. Waves or wind or just the static of a man who'd never learned how to begin a conversation with his own daughter. I wanted to check in. See how you were doing. I waited. Glenn was the kind of person where if you let the silence sit long enough, the real sentence would eventually fall out of him like a coin from a pocket you forgot you'd filled. Is there anything I should know about Dad's situation? He said finally. The estate, I mean. Your mother mentioned something. My mother mentioned something. Which meant Patricia had broken 6 years of ex-spouse silence to talk about money. Interesting. I told him the same story. Debts. Library fund. Nothing left. Glenn was quiet for a long time, not the calculating quiet of Patricia deciding which emotion to perform, just quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight. Okay, kiddo, he said. Just that. And then, I'm sorry you're dealing with all of this. I know he meant a lot to you. He didn't ask about the house. He didn't mention property values or waterfront or market conditions. He just said okay, and he said sorry, and he called me kiddo, which he hadn't called me since I was 16. I'd told him I was too old for it back then. I'd been wrong. You're never too old for it, not when it comes from the right place. That night, I told Hazel about the call. She was on her break at the hospital, me lying on my couch staring at the Rhode Island-shaped water stain on my ceiling. Hazel's reaction surprised me. Don't let him do this, Nora. Sharp, immediate, like she'd been waiting for this exact scenario. Dad doesn't get to show up now, after years of nothing. Not after he missed every holiday, every birthday that mattered, every single time you needed him, and he was in Portsmouth fixing somebody else's boat. I started to say he seemed genuine, that he'd said kiddo, that he hadn't asked about money. That's what makes it worse, she said. He's playing the long game, being nice now because he thinks nice gets you access later. You need to protect yourself. She told me to keep my distance. She said Glenn had a way of making you feel sorry for him, and feeling sorry for someone is not the same as trusting them. I didn't argue, but something sat wrong. A small pebble in my shoe I couldn't locate. Glenn had called me kiddo. He hadn't asked about money, and Hazel wanted me to treat him like a threat. I pushed the feeling down. Hazel knew best. She always knew best. Now, before I keep going, I need to say this. If you're listening right now, it means you clicked on this story and stayed, and that means something to me. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love it if you did. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. All right, back to this mess. 2 days after Glenn's call, my mother escalated. The text arrived at 11:14 on a Thursday night. Prime Patricia timing, late enough to feel urgent, early enough to claim she wasn't being dramatic. Your grandfather would be ashamed of you for shutting out your own family over a house that should belong to all of us. We gave him years, Nora. Years. And now you and some lawyer are deciding who deserves what. This isn't who we raised you to be. The irony of Patricia writing about shame while still owing $35,000 she'd never repaid would have been funny if it didn't burn a hole through my sternum. Then Dale started calling, separately, his own campaign, twice that week, each time with that smooth, reasonable voice. He talked about family unity, practical decisions, said my grandfather would have wanted things handled calmly. He said calmly like he was reading it off a cue card. On the second call, I asked him directly what his interest was in my grandfather's house. He paused just long enough for me to hear the lie being assembled. I'm just trying to help the family, Nora. But I'd already done the math. Dale Voss ran a real estate agency in Scarborough. Small operation, 3 agents, coastal properties. And the man I hadn't recognized at the funeral, the one with the expensive watch and the posture of someone who'd never carried his own luggage, was Dale's business partner, Craig Fenton. I found him on the agency website. His bio said he specialized in waterfront property acquisitions in York and Cumberland counties. Dale hadn't come to the funeral to mourn. He'd come to walk the property. I showed the text and told Hazel about Dale's calls. She shook her head slowly, the way she did when something confirmed exactly what she already believed. You need to respond to Mom, she said. Something firm, something that draws a line. She leaned forward. Let me help you write it. I know exactly what to say. What I heard was my sister protecting me. What it actually was, and I wouldn't figure this out for weeks, was isolation. Hazel sat on my bedroom floor with her laptop balanced on her crossed legs and said, "Let's make sure she never texts you like that again." It was a Tuesday night. She'd come straight from a 12-hour shift at the hospital, still smelling faintly of hand sanitizer and that particular exhaustion that clings to people who spend their days keeping other people alive. She'd brought takeout from the Thai place on Congress Street, the one with the green curry that could strip paint, and we ate it on my floor because the kitchen table was covered in mail I hadn't opened since before the funeral. She opened a blank document on her laptop, cracked her knuckles like a pianist about to perform, and then she started composing. "We need to hit every point," she said, not looking up. The money she owes, the years of silence, the fact that she showed up to the funeral like it was a gala and then had the nerve to lecture you about family. I watched her type. Her fingers moved fast, certain, like she'd been drafting this letter in her head long before tonight. She'd pause occasionally, delete a line, replace it with something sharper. She was editing in real time, sculpting each sentence into something with edges. "Should I mention the 35,000? I asked. "Absolutely," she said. "Don't hold back. She needs to see it in writing. She needs to know you know, and that you're done pretending it doesn't matter." The message was 3 paragraphs. It mentioned the $35,000 Patricia had borrowed and never repaid. It mentioned the 3 years of silence, the missed holidays, the phone calls that never came, the birthday cards that stopped arriving, the way Patricia had told everyone at Thanksgiving that Teddy was getting difficult when the truth was she'd been too proud to apologize for a debt she never intended to honor. It mentioned the funeral, the new car, the blown-out hair, the designer black, the way Dale had walked the property like he was previewing a listing while the rest of us were trying to say goodbye. Hazel read it back to me. Every sentence landed like a stone thrown into still water. I could feel the ripples spreading outward, each one wider than the last. "Send it," she said. I sent it at 11 on a Tuesday night. watched the blue delivered tag appear under the message like a match being struck. Then I set the phone face down on my nightstand and stared at the ceiling for a long time. My mother didn't respond. My stepfather did. 1 line, 2 words, "You'll regret this." I showed it to Hazel the next morning. She barely glanced at it. "That's what people say when they've run out of arguments," she said. "He's got nothing. They've both got nothing." She said it with the confidence of someone who'd already mapped the entire chessboard and knew which pieces were still standing. At the time, I mistook that confidence for strength, for loyalty, for the particular ferocity of a little sister who'd fight the whole world for you if you asked her to. What I didn't see, what I couldn't see, was that Hazel had just helped me burn the last bridge between me and the only people who might have eventually asked the right questions. Patricia was selfish. Dale was calculating. But they were also the only people besides Maggie who had any reason to look closely at the estate. And now they weren't just distant. They were enemies. I'd made sure of it myself, with my own thumbs, at 11 at night, on a message my sister had written. And somehow I was the one holding the match. The days after that message existed in a fog. I went to work at the orthodontics practice, processed billing codes, answered the phone with the bright, professional voice they trained us to use, smiled at patients in the waiting room, asked about their weekends, complimented a 12-year-old on her new brace's color. Purple. She was thrilled. I was barely there. After my shift, I'd sit in the parking lot for 20, sometimes 30 minutes, eating whatever I'd grabbed from the vending machine, protein bars mostly, the peanut butter kind that tastes like sawdust held together by ambition. I'd sit there with the engine off and the windows fogging up and watch the other cars pull out one by one until mine was the last one in the lot. I couldn't bring myself to drive home and sit alone with my thoughts. My apartment had become a museum of all the conversations I didn't want to replay. My receipt from Hannaford that month looked like I was feeding a family of 6. Frozen pizzas, cereal, 3 pints of ice cream, 2 mint chip, and 1 cookie dough, because I was apparently diversifying my coping mechanisms. I wasn't cooking. I wasn't sleeping more than 4 or 5 hours. I was functioning the way a car functions when the check engine light has been on for 3 weeks and you've just decided to turn the radio up louder. I called Hazel most nights. She always answered. Second ring. She'd listen to me talk about nothing, about work, about the weird dream I had where Teddy was alive and organizing his books, but they were all blank inside. She'd laugh at the right moments and go quiet at the right moments and say things like, "You're going to get through this, and I'm right here, and we're all we have." We're all we have. She said that a lot. I loved hearing it. It made me feel less alone in a world that had gotten very quiet and very cold. What I didn't notice was that the reason my world had gotten so quiet was because Hazel had systematically helped me silence every other voice in it. Glenn, Patricia, Dale. One by one, every connection had been cut or burned or dismissed. And in the empty space that was left, there was only Hazel. Patient, present, always on the second ring. And somehow I was the one holding the match. My mother hired a lawyer. I found out on a Monday because Maggie called me at 8:15 in the morning, which for Maggie was practically a fire alarm. I was standing in my bathroom, toothbrush in my mouth, half-dressed for work in a blouse I'd ironed badly and pants I'd pulled from the clean laundry pile that lived permanently on top of my dryer. The phone buzzed on the sink counter and I saw Maggie's name, and my stomach did something it had never done before, this dropping sensation. Like the floor had opened up beneath my ribs, and everything inside me was falling into a space I didn't know existed. I answered with toothpaste still in my mouth. Some of it dripped onto my work pants, a white glob of mint foam on dark gray fabric, right above the knee. I stared at it while Maggie talked. It was that kind of morning. Patricia had retained an attorney named Bradley Marsh out of Portland. He'd filed a notice of intent to contest the will. The grounds were undue influence. My mother was claiming that my grandfather had been mentally compromised in his final years and that I had manipulated him into changing his estate documents in my favor. I hadn't even known about the will until after Teddy died. I told Maggie that, my voice too loud, my hand gripping the edge of the sink like it was the only solid thing left. "I know," Maggie said. Her voice was flat, steady, the voice of someone who'd done this enough times to know that panic was a luxury neither of us could afford, and we can prove it. The will was drafted with a competency evaluation on file, 2 independent witnesses, and a notarized letter of intent. This contest has the structural integrity of wet cardboard. But a contest meant probate getting extended, legal fees, months of waiting while lawyers exchanged documents and filed motions and billed by the hour. Bradley Marsh charged $4,000 just to open a file. My mother didn't have that kind of money to waste on a case that wasn't going anywhere, which meant someone had convinced her it was worth it. I stood in my bathroom and did the math while toothpaste dried on my pants. Patricia's real estate agent husband ran a small agency in Scarborough. He wasn't broke, but he wasn't throwing $4,000 at a legal Hail Mary without reason either. Someone had told Patricia there was money, real money, enough to justify the risk. Someone had given her just enough information to make her believe that contesting the will could pay off. I didn't catch the significance of that. Not then. My brain was too busy short-circuiting over the word contest to do the detective work it should have been doing. I wiped the toothpaste off my pants with a wet washcloth, which made it worse, and drove to work with a damp spot on my knee and a headache that started behind my left eye and spread outward like a stain. That week passed in a blur of billing codes and forced smiles and parking lot dinners. I processed insurance claims for teenagers getting their braces tightened, while my own life was being pulled apart at the roots. One afternoon, a patient's mother asked me if I was feeling okay, said I looked pale. I told her I was fine. She didn't believe me. I didn't believe me either. Thursday evening, I called Hazel. She was home, her day off, and I could hear the TV in the background, something with a laugh track. I told her about the contest, about Bradley Marsh, about the undue influence claim. I told her my mother was accusing me of manipulating a man whose crossword puzzles I couldn't even finish. Hazel made that sound she made, the half sigh, half growl that meant she was angry enough to bite through something. Mom's always been like this, she said. Hire a bull, hope it breaks something. She doesn't have a case, Nora. She has a tantrum with a filing fee. That made me laugh, which felt strange, like finding a flower growing through a crack in a parking lot. You appreciate it, but you also know it's not supposed to be there. Then Hazel asked something that, at the time, sounded like concern. Is Maggie really equipped to handle something like this? She said. I mean, she's been great with the estate stuff, but a contest is different. Does she have partners? Is it just her at that firm? I told her Maggie had been doing this for 23 years, that she'd handled worse. I know, Hazel said quickly. I'm not saying she's not good. I just want to make sure you're protected. That's all. You're my sister. I worry. She said it the way you'd say it if you meant it. Soft, earnest, with just enough vulnerability in the voice to make you feel guilty for even questioning it. I told her I appreciated her looking out for me. She said that's what sisters do. What I didn't hear, underneath the worry and the warmth and the second-ring reliability, was reconnaissance. Hazel wasn't asking about Maggie's firm because she wanted me protected. She was asking because she wanted to know exactly how much legal firepower stood between her and $3.8 million. But that realization was still weeks away. Right then, sitting on my couch with the TV off and the apartment too quiet and the damp spot on my pants finally dry, I just thought my sister was looking out for me. Someone had told my mother there was money worth fighting for. Someone had convinced her it was worth the risk. I didn't catch the significance of that until much later. Thursday evening. One more try. I called my mother with the kind of hope that only exists in people who haven't fully accepted that some doors are nailed shut. I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought that if I stripped away the lawyers and the money and the texts written at 11 at night, there'd still be something underneath. Some flicker of the woman who used to braid my hair before school and sing off-key to Fleetwood Mac in the car, and once stayed up until 3 in the morning, helping me build a diorama of the solar system out of styrofoam balls and acrylic paint. That woman had to still be in there somewhere. Under the designer black and the performance tears and Dale's voice in the background, she had to be. Patricia picked up. I asked if we could just talk. No Dale, no lawyers, no accusations, just the two of us, mother and daughter, like it used to be, if it ever really was. She was quiet for maybe 2 seconds. Then her voice came back with that edge, the one that meant the wall was up and the drawbridge was raised and nothing I said was getting through. There's nothing to talk about, Nora, until you do the right thing and share what your grandfather left. I know there's more than what you're telling me. I grew up in that world. I know how these things work. I asked her why she didn't call Teddy back, why she let 3 years go by without a word, why she never repaid the $35,000. The questions came out of me like water from a broken pipe, messy and pressurized, and impossible to stop once they started. Click. She hung up on me, my own mother. I sat on my couch holding the phone against my chest like it was something wounded. The screen went dark. The apartment was quiet in that specific way that quiet gets when you've just been rejected by someone who's supposed to love you unconditionally. It's not silent. It's loud. It hums with all the things that weren't said and all the things that were. I almost called Hazel. My thumb was hovering over her name. Second nature by now. The reflex of someone who'd been trained to reach for the same hand every time she stumbled. But instead, for reasons I still don't fully understand, I called Glenn. He answered on the 5th ring. There was noise behind him, the clank of metal, the hiss of something mechanical, the boat shop. He was still at work at 7:30 in the evening, which was either dedication or avoidance or both. Nora? He said my name like a question, like he wasn't sure I was real. I told him Patricia hung up on me. I didn't give him details, didn't mention the estate or the lawyers or any of it, just that I'd tried to talk to my mother and she'd shut the door. Glenn was quiet. The mechanical hissing stopped. I heard him set something down, metal on metal, and then what might have been a chair creaking as he sat. "I don't know how to help you, Nora," he said. His voice was rough around the edges, like he was sanding it down as he spoke, trying to make it smooth enough to be useful. "I'm not good at this. I never have been. But I'm here if you need me. For whatever that's worth." For whatever that's worth. Like he was apologizing for the currency of his own presence, like he knew it wasn't enough, but it was all he had in his pockets. He didn't offer solutions. He didn't tell me to call a lawyer or write another letter or try harder. He didn't mention the estate. He just sat there on the other end of the line, breathing, existing, being present in the clumsy, insufficient way that was the only way Glenn Ellison knew how to be present. "Thanks, Dad," I said, and I meant it more than I expected to. Hazel came over an hour later. She brought a rotisserie chicken from Hannaford and a bag of Hawaiian rolls and a 2-liter of ginger ale because she said my apartment looked like it needed something with bubbles. We sat on the kitchen floor because the table was still buried under unopened mail. She tore the chicken apart with her hands and I ate Hawaiian rolls straight from the bag, and we didn't bother with plates because neither of us had the energy to pretend we were functional adults. I told her about Patricia, the hang-up, the click that felt like a period at the end of a sentence I didn't want to finish. Hazel shook her head. "She's never going to give you what you need, Nora. Some people only know how to take." Then I told her about Glenn, about calling him instead of her, about what he'd said. Something shifted in Hazel's face, subtle, like a cloud passing over the sun, there and gone. But I caught it, a tightening around the jaw, a flicker in the eyes that wasn't quite anger but wasn't quite nothing. "Being there isn't the same as showing up," she said. Her voice was even controlled, but there was something underneath it, something with teeth. He said the same thing to me when Mom left. "I'm here, Hazel. I'm here." But he wasn't. He was in Portsmouth. He was always in Portsmouth. She pulled a piece of chicken from the bone and chewed it slowly, looking at the floor. "I just don't want you to get hurt again," she said. "Glenn has a way of making you feel sorry for him, and feeling sorry for someone is the fastest way to let your guard down." I nodded. She was right. She was always right. Glenn had been absent my entire adult life. One phone call and a rough-voiced "I'm here" didn't erase that. Hazel was the one who showed up. Hazel was the one on the kitchen floor at 9:30 on a Thursday night, pulling apart a grocery store chicken with her bare hands because she knew I hadn't eaten a real meal in days. But later that night, after Hazel left and I was washing the grease off my hands and throwing away the chicken bones in the empty Hawaiian rolls bag, I thought about Glenn's voice. The way it cracked on for whatever that's worth. The way he didn't try to fix anything. The way he just sat there in the noise of his boat shop and let me be sad without trying to turn it into something else. And I thought about Hazel. The way her jaw tightened when I mentioned Glenn. The way she steered me away from him every single time. The way she made his absence sound like a choice and his presence sound like a trick. Hazel wanted me separated from every single person who might eventually see what she was doing. But I didn't know that yet. I just thought my sister loved me. My grandfather kept a leather box in his study, oxblood brown, about the size of a shoebox, with brass hinges that didn't quite close anymore and a clasp that had lost its click sometime around the Clinton administration. The leather was worn smooth at the corners from decades of being opened and closed and carried from one room to another. It smelled like old pages and pipe tobacco and something faintly sweet, like the lemon furniture polish Teddy used on his bookshelves every other Saturday, whether they needed it or not. Inside that box was my grandfather's life in paper. Letters from my grandmother, written before I was born, in handwriting so elegant it looked like calligraphy. Letters from colleagues at the library where he'd worked for 26 years. Postcards from a trip to Edinburgh he'd taken in 1989 that he talked about so often you'd think he'd lived there. Birthday cards from me and Hazel, the early ones written in crayon with letters that leaned in every direction like a crowd trying to see a parade. And a small leather-bound notebook he carried in his shirt pocket, the same pocket as the mechanical pencil, filled with notes about his book collection, acquisition dates, condition assessments, a running wish list of first editions he was still hunting for, with little stars next to the ones he considered most important. That box sat in the bottom drawer of his desk in the study for as long as I could remember. Every time I visited, I'd see it there, nestled between a stack of old tax returns and a tin of peppermint candies he kept for when Hazel and I were young and never bothered to remove after we grew up. The box was part of the furniture, part of the house, part of Teddy. After the funeral reception, when the casseroles had been covered in plastic wrap and the paper plates had been thrown away and the last of the neighbors had said their condolences and driven off, I went to the study. I needed to be in that room. I needed to sit in his chair and look at his shelves and touch the spine of the Faulkner he loved most, the one he said was worth more than his car and twice as reliable. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk. The box was gone. I pulled the drawer all the way out, reached into the back. Nothing. I checked the drawer above it, the one below. I got on my hands and knees and looked under the desk, behind the filing cabinet, inside the closet where Teddy kept a sewing kit from 1997 and a collection of L. Bean catalogs he swore he was going to recycle. Nothing. I checked every shelf, every surface, every corner of that study. The box was gone. Decades of letters, my grandmother's handwriting, my crayon birthday cards, Teddy's notebook with every detail of his beloved collection. Gone. I was gutted. Those letters had nothing to do with money. They were my grandfather's voice, the one I was never going to hear again, preserved in ink and paper and the particular way he crossed his T's with a slight upward flourish, like the letter was tipping its hat to the next one. Someone had taken them. I told Hazel the following week. We were on the phone, me pacing my apartment, her just getting home from a night shift. I described the box, the missing drawer, the empty space where decades of memory used to live. Hazel was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke, and her voice had that certain quality it got when she'd already arrived at a conclusion and was just waiting for you to catch up. Dale was upstairs for 20 minutes after the service, she said. Remember? He told Mom he was checking the bathroom plumbing. Who checks plumbing at a funeral, Nora? Who goes upstairs alone in a dead man's house during a reception? She let the question sit. I could feel it taking root. They took it, she said softly. They probably thought there was something valuable inside. A deed, maybe. Account numbers. Something they could use. I believed her. Of course I believed her. Dale had walked the property at the funeral like he was previewing a listing. Patricia had asked about the house before she'd asked about me. And Dale had been upstairs, alone, for 20 minutes. The math wrote itself. But here's the thing I didn't think about. Not then. Not for weeks. Hazel had a key to the house. Hazel had been in that house hundreds of times over the past 2 years. She'd watered the plants, she'd checked the thermostat, she'd sat in that very study every Sunday, reading books with a man who kept his most precious possessions in a leather box in the bottom drawer of his desk. She knew the box was there, she knew what was inside it, and she'd had access to it any time she wanted, for months before the funeral and weeks after it. But I didn't think about that, because Hazel was the good one. 2 days later, Maggie called with something else. There's been an inquiry at the storage facility, she said. Her voice had that careful, measured quality it took on when she was being precise on purpose. Someone contacted the archival company that manages your grandfather's book collection. They requested a full inventory with individual appraisals for every item in storage. They used Theodore's name, but the phone number on the request doesn't match any number associated with his accounts. I asked whose number it was. We're tracing it, Maggie said. but whoever made the call knew the name of the facility, knew the account details, and knew enough about the collection to ask specifically about the first editions. This wasn't a random inquiry. This was someone who'd done their homework. The line was quiet for a moment. I could hear Maggie breathing, steady, deliberate. "Who else knew about the storage facility, Nora?" she asked. "Besides you and me?" I thought about it. Teddy had been private about the collection. He didn't advertise it, but the people close to him knew. Patricia would have known it existed, though probably not the specifics. Dale might have guessed, given his real estate instincts. Glenn probably knew his father collected books, but likely couldn't name a single title. And Hazel knew everything. She'd helped Teddy organize the collection records the previous spring. She'd driven him to the storage facility twice when he wanted to check on a shipment. But I didn't say her name, because the thought didn't form, because Hazel was the one who watered the plants and held my hand and answered on the second ring. Hazel was the good one. Hazel had a key to the house. Hazel had a key to the house. I didn't think about that sentence for another 4 weeks. When I finally did, it changed everything. Maggie filed the motion to dismiss on a Tuesday in late October. By Friday, Bradley Marsh's office had called her to say they were reassessing the viability of the case. Reassessing the viability. That's lawyer for we looked at the actual documents and realized we're billing a client $4,000 to fight a battle with the structural integrity of wet cardboard. Maggie walked me through it in her flat, unhurried way, the voice she used when she wanted me to understand something clearly without panicking about it. Teddy's will had been drafted with what she called belt and suspenders protection, a competency evaluation performed by an independent physician, documented and dated. 2 witnesses who were neither family members nor beneficiaries, both willing to testify that Theodore Ellison had been sharp, specific, and fully aware of what he was doing when he signed. And a notarized letter of intent, written in Teddy's own hand, stating that the distribution of his estate reflected his deliberate wishes and was not the product of coercion, influence, or confusion. "Your grandfather was thorough," Maggie said. I could hear the coffee mug tapping against the desk on her end. He was the kind of man who kept carbon copies of his grocery lists. "You don't think he'd leave his estate vulnerable to a challenge from someone who hadn't spoken to him in 3 years?" By the following Wednesday, the contest was withdrawn. No hearing, no depositions, no dramatic courtroom scene, just a quiet filing and a phone call from Maggie that lasted exactly 9 seconds. "It's done," she said. "Go eat something that isn't from a vending machine." I sat on my couch and cried. Not a dramatic cry, not the kind you see in movies where someone collapses to their knees and the music swells and rain starts falling at the exact right moment. This was the other kind, the kind where you just leak. Your eyes water, your nose runs, and you don't bother wiping any of it because there's nobody watching, and you're so tired of holding yourself together that letting liquid fall out of your face feels like the most productive thing you've done in weeks. The relief wasn't clean. It wasn't the kind where the weight lifts and you feel light again. It was more like setting down a suitcase you've been carrying up a hill. Your arms are free, but your shoulders still ache and the hill is still there, and you know there's more luggage at the top. Patricia sent a text 2 days later. It arrived in the afternoon, mid-shift, while I was explaining to a patient's father that his insurance didn't cover the type of retainer his daughter needed, and watching his face go through the 5 stages of grief in about 12 seconds. The text read, "I think we all got carried away. I hope you're doing okay." No apology, no accountability, no mention of the lawyer she'd hired or the accusations she'd made or the $35,000 that still hung between us like a debt neither of us wanted to name. Just a feather-light acknowledgement that something had happened, the conversational equivalent of commenting on weather that had passed. I read it 4 times. Each time it hit differently. The first time it stung. The second time it made me angry. The third time it made me tired. The 4th time, I just felt something go flat inside me, like a balloon that doesn't pop but slowly, quietly, loses its air until it's just a wrinkled piece of rubber on the floor that nobody picks up. I didn't respond, but I didn't block her either. Progress, I guess. The kind of progress that doesn't feel like progress at all but technically qualifies, because at least you didn't set anything on fire. That week, I tried to settle back into something resembling normal life. I went to work. I processed billing codes. I ate meals at a table instead of on the floor or in a parking lot. I did laundry. I cleaned the kitchen table, finally, which had been buried under unopened mail for so long that some of the envelopes had started to curl at the edges like they were trying to escape. Underneath the pile, I found a birthday card from Teddy, sent back in April, that I'd somehow missed. Inside, in his careful handwriting, it said, "Another year older, still no wiser. That's my girl." I held that card for a long time. Then I put it in the drawer of my nightstand, next to the Celtic shirt I slept in, and a hair tie and a half-empty bottle of melatonin. The important things. I was starting to breathe again. The legal threat was gone. Patricia had retreated into her passive-aggressive texting. Dale had gone quiet, probably busy reassessing the viability of his own schemes. Glenn hadn't called again, but he'd sent a text that said simply, "Thinking of you, kiddo," and I'd stared at it for 5 minutes before putting my phone down without replying, but also without deleting it. The world was getting smaller and quieter, and in that quiet, I started to believe that maybe the worst was over, that the storm had passed, and all that was left was cleanup. I was wrong about that. I was very wrong. But the wrongness wouldn't arrive for another 4 weeks, and in the meantime, there was a Saturday coming, and Hazel was bringing wine. That Saturday, she showed up at my door with a bottle of cheap Pinot Grigio and a look on her face that I mistook for love. Hazel showed up that Saturday with a $9 bottle of Pinot Grigio and 2 plastic cups she had stolen from the Portland Lobster Festival the summer before. They had little cartoon lobsters on them, bright red, wearing tiny chef hats. Teddy would have loved them. He collected ridiculous things like that, mugs with bad puns, magnets shaped like lighthouses, a coaster from a bar in Edinburgh that said, "Yea cannae beat a wee dram" in gold lettering. Hazel knew that about him. She knew everything about him. We sat on my kitchen floor because the table felt too formal and the couch felt too far from the wine. She poured heavy. She always poured heavy. I remember thinking that was generous. I remember thinking a lot of things about my sister that I would later have to unlearn. She asked me how I was doing, and I told her the truth. I told her I felt like someone had taken a pressure washer to the inside of my chest and everything was clean but raw. She laughed at that. Not a cruel laugh, a real one, the kind that said she understood. And then she leaned her head against the cabinet behind her and said something I was not ready for. She said she had been thinking about the house. Not in a greedy way. Not like Patricia. She said it slowly, like she had rehearsed it in the car. She said she thought it would be a shame to let the Cape Porpoise property sit empty through another winter. The pipes could freeze. The roof had that section Teddy kept patching with marine-grade sealant and a prayer. She said maybe it made sense for someone to stay there part-time, keep the heat on, walk through the rooms, make sure nothing got worse. She said she would be happy to do it. I took a long sip from my lobster cup and looked at her. She looked sincere. She looked like someone who loved that house the way I did, and maybe she did love it. I have gone back and forth on that more times than I can count. Maybe she loved the house and also loved what the house was worth. Maybe those two things lived in the same room inside her and she never saw the wall between them. I told her I would think about it. She smiled and said, "Of course, no pressure, just an idea." Then she refilled my cup and changed the subject to a patient at Maine Medical who had asked her to marry him while still under anesthesia. We laughed until my ribs hurt. That is the part I miss. The laughing, the floor, the cheap wine in stolen cups. I miss it the way you miss a place that burned down. You know it is gone, but your body still wants to drive there. 2 days later, she texted me a name. Denise Kowalski. She said Denise was a real estate attorney, very sharp, very reasonable, and that it might be smart to have someone local look over the property paperwork, just in case, just to be safe. She said Maggie was great, but she was an estate lawyer, not a property specialist. She said it with such care, such thoughtfulness, like she was protecting me. I did not call Denise Kowalski. Something stopped me. Not suspicion exactly, more like a feeling in my stomach, the kind you get when you are about to step off a curb and a car passes closer than it should. You do not see it coming. You just feel the wind. I mentioned it to Maggie the following Thursday during a routine call about transferring one of Teddy's investment accounts. Maggie went quiet for about 4 seconds, which, if you know Maggie, is the equivalent of someone else screaming. Then she said, very calmly, "Do not call that woman. I will explain why when I see you." That Friday, I drove up to Kennebunkport. Maggie was waiting in her office with 2 coffees and a manila folder. She told me she had done some digging after I mentioned Hazel's question about her firm a few weeks back. She said she had not wanted to say anything until she was sure. She said she was sure now. Denise Kowalski was not just a real estate attorney. She was a real estate attorney who had recently handled a client inquiry regarding a contested waterfront property in Cape Porpoise. The inquiry had come in 11 days ago. The caller had not given a last name. She described herself as a family member of the deceased owner. She asked about the process for challenging sole ownership of an inherited property when multiple family members had provided care during the owner's final years. Maggie set the folder on the desk between us. She said, "The caller's number matched your sister's cell phone." I put my coffee down. I did not say anything for a long time. The radiator tapped against the wall, once, twice, 3 times. I counted them because counting was easier than thinking. Maggie leaned forward. She was not angry. She was not dramatic. She spoke the way a doctor speaks when the test results are back and the news is not what anyone wanted. She said, "Nora, your sister is not protecting you. She is building a case." I picked up my coffee again. It had gone cold. I drank it anyway because I needed something to do with my hands. Outside the window, a gull landed on the railing and stared at me like it had an opinion. I thought about the lobster festival cups. I thought about the floor of my kitchen. I thought about Hazel holding Teddy's hand at 4:17 in the morning while the monitors went flat. I thought about her voice on the phone, always answering on the second ring. And then I thought about the leather box. The one with the brass hinges that smelled like pipe tobacco and old pages. The one that had disappeared from the bottom drawer of Teddy's study. The one Hazel had blamed on Dale. Hazel had a key to that house. She had always had a key. I drove to Cape Porpoise the next morning without telling anyone. Not Maggie, not Hazel, especially not Hazel. It was early November and the trees along Route 1 had already given up their color. Everything was brown and gray and stripped down to what it actually was. I remember thinking the world looked honest for the first time in months. The house sat at the end of a gravel road that curved toward the water like it was too tired to go straight. White clapboard, green shutters, a porch that wrapped around the east side where Teddy used to sit with his coffee and watch lobster boats come in before sunrise. The marine-grade sealant on the roof was holding, but just barely. Hazel had been right about that. She had been right about a lot of practical things. That was part of what made her so dangerous. She paid attention to the details that made you trust her. I let myself in with the key I kept on a plain steel ring next to my car key. The house smelled the way it always smelled, sea salt and old wood and something faintly sweet that I have never been able to name. Maybe it was the books. Teddy had books in every room, stacked on windowsills, lined along hallways, piled on the kitchen counter next to a ceramic jar shaped like an owl that held nothing but rubber bands and a single birthday candle. I went straight to the study. It was a small room at the back of the house, one window facing the water, a desk that Teddy had bought at an estate sale in 1986 for $40, a green banker's lamp with a pull chain, 2 bookshelves, a filing cabinet, and the bottom drawer of the desk where the leather box used to be. The drawer was empty. I already knew it would be, but I pulled it all the way out anyway and set it on the floor. I do not know what I expected to find. Dust, a paperclip, some proof that I was wrong about everything. What I found was a second drawer. Not a hidden compartment exactly, more like a shallow tray built into the underside of the desktop, above where the main drawer slid in. You would never see it unless you removed the drawer completely and looked up. The tray was maybe 2 inches deep. It was held in place by 4 small brass screws and lined with green felt, the same shade as the banker's lamp. Teddy had built it himself. I could tell because the corners were slightly uneven and one of the screws was a different size than the others. That was Teddy. Close enough was good enough when it came to carpentry, never when it came to books. Inside the tray was a single envelope, cream-colored, no name on the front, sealed with a piece of clear tape that had yellowed at the edges. I opened it standing up because sitting down felt like it would make whatever was inside more permanent. Inside was a folded letter written in Teddy's handwriting, the same careful slant he used for everything, the same blue ink from the fountain pen he kept in his shirt pocket like it was 1952. The letter was dated the April before he died, 6 months before the first stroke. It was addressed to me. He wrote that he knew what was coming. Not the stroke specifically, but the aftermath. He said he had watched families fall apart over smaller amounts than what he was leaving behind, and he did not want that for me. He said he had chosen me because I was the only one who ever sat in his study and asked about the stories inside the books instead of the prices on the spines. He wrote about Hazel. He said he loved her. He said she was kind and she was capable, and she had been a tremendous comfort in his final years. But he said he had noticed something shift. He said it started the spring before, when she accompanied him to a rare book dealer in Boston. He had brought 3 volumes for appraisal, a signed Hemingway, a first edition Steinbeck, and a slim poetry collection by Elizabeth Bishop that was worth more than both of them combined. Hazel had watched the appraiser write the numbers down. She had not said anything in the car on the way home. But the next week, she asked him how many books in the collection were worth over $1,000. And the week after that, she asked whether the collection was insured separately or as part of the homeowner's policy. He wrote, "She does not see the stories anymore. She sees the prices. And I do not blame her for that. Money does something to people. It turns love into arithmetic. But I will not leave my life's collection to arithmetic." I read that line 4 times. I read it standing in his study with the November light coming through the window and the lobster boats rocking in the harbor below. I read it and I understood why he had left everything to me. Not because I was better than Hazel. Not because I deserved it more. But because I was the one who had never counted. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I put the envelope in my coat pocket. I replaced the tray and slid the drawer back in and pushed it closed until it clicked. Then I sat in his chair. The leather was cracked and cold. The banker's lamp was unplugged. The room was quiet except for the faint sound of water against the rocks outside. I sat there for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the wall, the one shaped like a ship's wheel that had run 3 minutes fast for as long as I could remember. I sat there and I thought about my sister. About the phone calls she had always answered on the second ring. About the Sunday drives. About the pill organizer and the orange juice and the hand she held at 4:17 in the morning. And then I thought about the appraiser in Boston, writing numbers on a slip of paper while Hazel watched. I was not angry yet. That came later. What I felt in that chair was something quieter and worse. I felt the exact moment I stopped believing in her. I called Hazel the next evening. She answered on the second ring. Of course she did. I asked her to meet me for coffee Wednesday morning at a place called Tandem on Congress Street. It was a small shop with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu and a barista who always looked like she had just woken up from a nap she did not want to end. Hazel liked it there. She said it felt real. Not like the places on Exchange Street where tourists paid $6 for a latte and pretended they discovered Portland. She said sure. She said she would be there at 9. I got there at 8:30. I sat at a table near the window with my back to the wall because Maggie had told me something once that stuck. She said, when you are about to have a difficult conversation, make sure you can see the door, not because you need to leave, because you need to know you can. I had the manila folder in my bag. I had Teddy's letter in my coat pocket, the same coat I had worn to Cape Porpoise. I had not moved it. I did not want to put it in a drawer. Drawers lose things. Hazel walked in at 9:02. She was wearing scrubs under her jacket, which meant she had a shift at 11. She ordered a cortado and sat across from me and smiled and said, I looked tired. I said I was. She said I should take a weekend off, go somewhere. Maybe the house in Cape Porpoise. She said it like it was a casual thought and not a strategy. I let her talk for a while. She told me about a difficult patient, a man in his 70s who kept pulling out his own IV because he did not trust the medication. She said it with compassion. She said, some people would rather hurt themselves than let someone else help. I almost laughed at that. Almost. Then I said I had something to show her. I pulled the manila folder out of my bag and set it on the table between our cups. She looked at it the way you look at a piece of mail you were not expecting. Not afraid, not yet, just curious. I opened it. Inside was the call log Maggie had obtained. The record from Denise Kowalski's office showing an incoming call from a number that matched Hazel's cell phone. The inquiry about contesting sole ownership of an inherited waterfront property in Cape Porpoise. The date. The duration. 4 minutes and 31 seconds. Hazel looked at the paper for a long time. She did not pick it up. She did not touch it. Her cortado sat untouched, a thin layer of foam settling into nothing. Then she said, where did you get this? I said, Maggie. She nodded slowly. She looked out the window. A bus went past on Congress Street. Someone on a bicycle ran a red light. The barista dropped a spoon behind the counter and said a word I will not repeat. The whole world kept moving the way it does when yours is falling apart. Hazel said, I was trying to understand the process. That is all. I wanted to know what our options were. I said, our options. She said, yes, in case things got complicated, in case Patricia came back with another lawyer. She said she was being proactive. She said she was protecting me. I reached into my coat pocket and set Teddy's letter on the table next to the folder. I said, I found this in his desk, in a compartment you did not know about. She picked up the letter. She read it. I watched her eyes move across the lines. I watched them stop at the part about the trip to Boston, about the appraiser, about the numbers on the slip of paper. I watched her read the sentence about stories and prices, and I watched something change in her face. Not guilt, exactly. Something closer to recognition. The look of someone seeing themselves in a mirror they did not know was there. She set the letter down. She pressed her fingertips against the edge of the table. Her nails were short and clean the way they always were. Nurse's hands. Hands that had held Teddy's while his heart stopped. She said, he wrote that about me. I said yes. She said, he knew. I said yes. She was quiet for maybe 15 seconds, the longest 15 seconds of my life. And then she said something I was not prepared for. She did not apologize. She did not deny it. She did not cry or shout or push the folder back across the table. She said, do you know what it is like to hold someone's hand for 2 years while they die and know that everything they own is going to someone who visited on holidays? Her voice did not break. It was steady and clear, and it cut through me like a blade drawn slowly across paper. She meant every word, and that was the worst part. She was not lying. She was not performing. She believed she had earned it. She believed that love could be measured in hours spent, and errands run, and pills sorted into plastic boxes with the days of the week printed on them. She believed the math was on her side. I picked up Teddy's letter. I folded it once along the original crease and put it back in my pocket. I closed the manila folder. I put it in my bag. I said, you had a key to his house. You had access to his study. The leather box is gone, Hazel. His letters, his notebook, the one that listed every book and what it was worth. She did not answer that. She picked up her cortado. She took a sip. It must have been cold by then, but she drank it like it was fine, like everything was fine. I stood up. I put on my coat. I left $12 on the table because the coffee was $4.50 and I did not want change. I walked to the door and I stopped and I turned back. She was looking at me, still sitting, still holding the cup. The foam was gone. I said, you used to answer on the second ring because you cared. When did it become because you were keeping watch? She did not answer that either. Hazel did not call me after the cafe. She did not text. She did not show up at my apartment with wine and stolen cups and a smile that made you forget she was dismantling your life, one careful suggestion at a time. The silence was louder than anything she had ever said. I went to work. I answered phones. I filed charts. I scheduled appointments for people with torn rotator cuffs and fractured wrists and herniated discs, and I smiled at every single one of them because that is what you do when your insides are in pieces. You function. You keep your voice level and your hands steady, and you save the falling apart for later. In your car, in your kitchen, in the shower where nobody can hear you breathe wrong. 3 days passed, then 4. On the 5th day, Maggie called. She said Hazel had filed a claim. Not through Denise Kowalski. Through a different attorney, someone out of Augusta named Peter Langford. Maggie said she had never heard of him, which meant he was either very new or very cheap or both. The claim alleged undue influence. It stated that Nora Ellison had manipulated Theodore Ellison during his final months of cognitive decline to alter his estate plan in her sole favor. It requested a full review of the will and a redistribution of assets based on equitable contribution by surviving family members. Maggie read me the key paragraph over the phone. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of the orthopedic clinic. My lunch was on the passenger seat, a turkey sandwich on wheat with too much mustard. I did not eat it that day or the next. The filing listed the total estate value at $3.4 million. Maggie paused after she said that number. She let it sit. Then she said, the actual estate value is $3.8 million. Your sister is off by $400,000. She does not have access to the real numbers. She is guessing. That was the moment I understood something I should have understood weeks earlier. Hazel had the leather box. She had Teddy's notebook. She had the list of books and their approximate values. But the notebook was old. Teddy had not updated it in over a year. The market had shifted. 3 of the rarest volumes had appreciated significantly after a major auction in New York the previous spring. Hazel was working with outdated numbers because the only source she had was a stolen one. Maggie said the claim would not survive a motion to dismiss. She said the cognitive decline argument was baseless because Teddy's physician, Dr. Richard Ainsley, had documented him as mentally competent at every visit through August, 5 weeks before the second stroke. She said the equitable contribution angle was subjective and difficult to prove in Maine probate court without financial records showing direct monetary investment in the estate. Hazel had provided care, yes. But care is not ownership. Love is not a lien. She said she would file the motion by Friday. She told me not to contact Hazel. She told me not to respond to Peter Langford if he reached out. She said let the paperwork do the work. I said okay. I sat in my car for another 20 minutes. The turkey sandwich got warm. The mustard soaked through the bread. I threw it away on my way back into the building. That weekend, Glenn called. Not a text this time, a real phone call. His voice sounded different, thinner, like someone had taken a layer off it. He said he had heard about the filing. I asked him how. He said Patricia had told him. I asked him how Patricia knew. He went quiet for a moment and then he said, Hazel called her. About 2 weeks ago. Maybe longer. I think they have been talking. I closed my eyes. I was on my couch. The apartment was dark except for the light above the stove. I could hear my neighbor's television through the wall, some game show. Applause and a buzzer and someone winning something. Glenn said he was sorry. He said he did not know what to do. He said he was not good at this. He said he never had been. He said when my mother and he split up, he had promised himself he would do better, and he had not, and he knew that, and it sat on him every single day like a stone he could not put down. I did not say anything for a while. He waited. He did not fill the silence with excuses or jokes or promises he could not keep. He just waited, and that was maybe the most honest thing my father had ever done. I said, "Did you know about the leather box?" He said no. I said, "Did Patricia?" He said he did not know. He said he would not be surprised. He said Patricia had been different since the funeral. He said she talked about the estate like it was something that had been taken from her, not something that was never hers. I said, Hazel called her 9 times in 4 months, Dad. He exhaled. It was a long breath, the kind that carries weight out of your chest but does not make you any lighter. He said, I know. I asked him what he wanted, what he actually wanted, not what Patricia wanted, not what made sense, not what was easy, what he wanted. He said, I want to see you. I want to sit across from you and not feel like I am on the wrong side of something. I told him I would think about it. He said okay. He said he would be here. He said that was the one thing he could promise. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. The game show ended. My neighbor turned off the television. The apartment went completely quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming and the faucet dripping the way it always did, 1 drop every 4 or 5 seconds, a rhythm I had stopped noticing months ago but heard clearly now. Maggie filed the motion to dismiss on Friday morning. She called me at 11:15 to confirm. She said, now we wait. I said I had been waiting my whole life. She laughed. It was the first time I had heard her laugh. It sounded like someone who had forgotten she could. The motion was granted on a Wednesday. Maggie called me at 2:13 in the afternoon. I was restocking supply cabinets at the clinic, counting boxes of nitrile gloves and trying to remember whether we needed medium or large. She said Peter Langford's office had not even filed a response. No counter-argument, no amended claim, nothing. The judge reviewed the motion, noted the documented cognitive competency from Dr. Ainsley, noted the absence of any financial evidence supporting equitable contribution, and dismissed the case. The whole thing lasted 9 seconds on the court docket. 9 seconds to end what had taken my sister months to build. Maggie said Langford's retainer was likely around $3,000 based on the Augusta market. She said Hazel had paid $3,000 to learn what Teddy already knew. That some things cannot be earned by counting. I thanked her. She said, do not thank me, thank your grandfather for keeping impeccable medical records and a doctor who actually read them. I laughed. She did not. I think she was serious. That evening I drove to South Portland to meet Glenn. He had suggested a diner on Broadway called Mill Creek. It was the kind of place with laminated menus and a pie case by the register, and a waitress who called everyone honey, regardless of age or gender or whether they wanted to be called honey. Glenn was already there when I arrived. He was sitting in a booth near the back with a cup of coffee that looked like it had been full an hour ago. He stood up when he saw me. He did not hug me. He did not try. He just stood there like he was waiting for permission to exist in the same space. We sat down. I ordered coffee. He ordered another one even though he had not finished the first. The waitress said, "2 coffees, coming right up, honey," and walked away humming something I almost recognized. For a while, neither of us spoke. He turned his cup in a slow circle on the table. I watched the cream swirl and settle. Outside the window, the parking lot was half empty, and a streetlight flickered on and off like it could not decide whether it was dark enough yet. Glenn spoke first. He said he owed me more than an apology, but an apology was where he had to start. He said he had not been present. Not after the divorce. Not after Teddy got sick. Not after the funeral. He said he had told himself he was giving me space, but the truth was, he was giving himself permission to disappear. He said disappearing was easier than showing up and being inadequate. I said, "You were not inadequate, Dad. You were absent. There is a difference." He nodded. He did not argue. He did not explain or qualify or soften it. He took it the way you take a shot at the doctor's office, straight and still and with your eyes open. He told me he had not spoken to Patricia in 3 weeks. He said the last time they talked, she had asked him to call me and find out whether the estate was really worth what Hazel said it was. He said he told her no. He said that was the first time in his life he had told Patricia no about anything and meant it. I believed him. Not because the words were pretty, because his hands were shaking when he said them. He asked about Hazel. I told him the claim was dismissed. I told him about the folder, the phone records, the letter from Teddy. I did not tell him about the leather box. Some things I was not ready to share. Some things belonged to me and Teddy, and the hidden drawer and the green felt and the 4 brass screws that did not quite match. Glenn listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sat back in the booth and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he looked at me and said, "Your grandfather was the best man I ever knew." And I was too proud to tell him that, while he was alive. The waitress brought the check. It was $11.60 for 4 cups of coffee and a slice of blueberry pie that Glenn had ordered while I was talking and eaten without me noticing. I reached for the check. He put his hand on it first, not aggressively, gently, like it was the one thing he could do right in that moment and he needed it. I let him pay. We walked to the parking lot together. The streetlight had made up its mind. It was on now, steady, casting a circle of yellow on the asphalt. Glenn stopped next to my car. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. The wind off the harbor smelled like salt and diesel and the last edge of autumn. He said, "I am not going to promise to be better. I have made that promise before and I broke it every time. But I am going to show up. That is what I can do. I can show up." I said, "Okay." He said, "Okay as in you believe me, or okay as in you are tired and want to go home?" I said, "Both." He smiled. It was small and crooked and it reminded me so much of Teddy that my chest hurt. I had not seen that before. The resemblance. Maybe I had not been looking. I got in my car. He stood in the parking lot until I pulled out. I watched him in my rearview mirror getting smaller under the streetlight. He did not move. He did not check his phone. He just stood there watching me go, like he was practicing what it looked like to not disappear. I drove home with the windows down even though it was 47 degrees. The cold air tasted clean. My apartment was dark when I got there. I did not turn on the lights. I sat on the couch and I listened to the faucet drip. One drop, then another, then another. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I had not seen in 3 weeks. It was Patricia. She wrote, "We need to talk. Not about money. About your grandmother's letters." I did not respond to Patricia's text that night. I let it sit on my screen the way she had let my silence sit for years. I read it once before bed, and once when I woke up, and once while I was brushing my teeth and looking at my own face in the mirror like it might tell me what to do. I called her the next afternoon from my car in the clinic parking lot. Same parking lot where I had heard about the filing. Same parking lot where I had thrown away a turkey sandwich with too much mustard. Apparently, this was where I processed the worst moments of my life. Between the dumpster and a handicap sign that leaned slightly to the left, Patricia answered on the first ring. She did not say hello. She said, "Thank you for calling." I said, "Tell me about the letters." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she wanted to meet in person. She said some things should not be said over the phone. I almost laughed at that because this was the same woman who had called me at 6:47 in the morning to ask about a house she had not visited in 3 years. But something in her voice sounded different. Not the practiced softness she used when she wanted something. Something rougher, like fabric that had been washed too many times and lost its pattern. We met the following Saturday at a park in Scarborough. Her choice, a bench near the marsh trail where the tall grass bent sideways in the wind and you could see herons standing in the shallow water like they were waiting for something they had been promised. It was mid-November, cold enough for gloves, but she was not wearing any. Her hands were in her lap, folded over each other, and she looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, something else. Like the scaffolding inside her had come down and what was left was just the building, plain and old and tired. Dale was not there. I asked. She said they were taking some time apart. She did not elaborate. I did not push. She said Hazel had given her the leather box. She said it plainly. No build-up, no performance, just the fact, set down between us like a stone on the bench. She said Hazel had brought it to her house in early October, about 2 weeks after the funeral. Hazel had told her she found it while cleaning out Teddy's study. She said she was keeping it safe. She said Nora was too emotional to deal with it right now, and it was better if someone more clear-headed held onto it. Patricia said she believed her. She said she wanted to believe her. I asked if she had opened it. She said yes. She said she read every letter inside, the ones from Teddy's colleagues at the library, the postcards from Edinburgh, the birthday cards in crayon, and the ones from my grandmother, love letters. Real ones. Written in blue ink on cream-colored stationery with a small botanical print in the corner. She said they were the most beautiful things she had ever read. She said her mother had written about the way light came through the kitchen window in the mornings, and how Teddy's hands smelled like book leather and cedar, and how she wanted to grow old slowly so she could remember every single day of it. Patricia stopped talking. She looked at the marsh. A heron took off from the water, slow and heavy, wings wide like a blanket being shaken out. She said reading those letters made her ashamed. She said she had spent so long being angry at Teddy for the $35,000, for the rejection, for choosing me, that she had forgotten he was a person. She said she forgot her own father had loved her mother so completely that he wrote it down and kept it in a box with brass hinges and carried it from one house to the next for 40 years. I asked where the box was now. She said it was in her car. She said she had brought it. We walked to the parking lot. She opened the trunk of the silver SUV, the same one she had driven to the funeral. The leather box was there, wrapped in a dish towel, oxblood brown, brass hinges. The smell hit me before I touched it. Old pages and pipe tobacco, and that faint lemon polish I could never quite name. I picked it up. It was heavier than I remembered. Or maybe I was lighter. Maybe grief takes weight out of you and everything else feels dense by comparison. I opened it in the parking lot. The letters were there, the postcards, the cards. The notebook was gone. I looked at her. She said, Hazel took the notebook before she gave me the box. I did not know what it was until Maggie's filing mentioned the book collection. Then I understood. I closed the box. I held it against my chest the way you hold something that has been lost and returned and will never be exactly the same. I said, Did you know what she was doing the whole time? Patricia shook her head. She said, Not the whole time, but longer than I should admit. That was the closest thing to honesty my mother had ever given me. It was not an apology. It was not a confession. It was an admission shaped like a bruise, something she could not hide anymore because the swelling had reached the surface. I put the box in my car. I closed the door. I stood there in the parking lot with the wind coming off the marsh and the smell of salt grass and cold mud. Patricia said, I am not going to ask for money. I am not going to ask for the house. I am not going to ask for anything. I said, What do you want then? She said, I want you to know I read your grandmother's letters, and I remembered what family was supposed to feel like. I did not hug her. I did not forgive her. I did not say it was okay, because it was not okay. But I looked at her and I saw something I had not seen since I was very young. I saw my mother, not Patricia Voss, not the woman who married Dale and filed a contest and called at 6:47, just my mother, standing in a parking lot with no gloves on, trying. I drove home with the leather box on the passenger seat. The notebook was still missing. Hazel still had it, and somewhere in Augusta, a $3,000 retainer was the only thing left of my sister's plan. But I had the letters. I had the words. I had the handwriting. That was enough for now. I went back to the Cape Porpoise house one more time before winter set in. It was the first week of December. The air had that clean, cold bite that makes you breathe deeper without meaning to. The gravel road was harder under my tires. The porch steps creaked louder than I remembered, like the house was stretching after a long sleep. I let myself in with the same steel keyring. The radiator was off. The rooms were cold. My breath made small clouds in the hallway. I did not go to the study this time. I went to the kitchen. The ceramic owl jar was still on the counter. Rubber bands and a single birthday candle. The window above the sink faced east, toward the water. I stood there and I understood for the first time what my grandmother had written about. The light. She had described the way morning light came through this window and landed on the counter like it was visiting. I had read that letter 3 times since getting the box back. Each time I noticed something new. A word she crossed out and rewrote. A place where the ink got heavier, like she was pressing down because the feeling was too big for normal pressure. I made coffee with the old percolator that Teddy refused to replace. It took 11 minutes. The kitchen smelled like it used to, like mornings that belonged to someone, like a house that was lived in and not just owned. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and the leather box open in front of me. The letters, the postcards, the crayon birthday cards. The space where the notebook used to be. A rectangle of darker leather where it had rested for years, a shadow of something taken. I thought about Hazel. I had not spoken to her since the cafe on Congress Street. 43 days. I did not know if I would ever speak to her again. I did not know if I wanted to. Some mornings I woke up and reached for my phone to call her before I remembered. Muscle memory is cruel that way. It keeps rehearsing a life that no longer exists. I did not hate her. That surprised me more than anything. I thought I would. I thought the betrayal would harden into something sharp and permanent, but it did not. It softened into something sadder, a kind of understanding I never asked for. She had held Teddy's hand while he died. She had driven him to every appointment. She had sorted his pills and stocked his juice and read to him on Sundays when the fog came in and the house felt like a ship at anchor. She had done all of that. And then she had looked at the numbers on a slip of paper in Boston, and something shifted inside her that she could not shift back. I do not think she woke up one day and decided to betray me. I think it happened the way most betrayals happen, slowly. One reasonable thought at a time. One justification stacked on another, until the pile was so tall she could not see over it anymore. She convinced herself she deserved it. And maybe by some measure she did. But deserving is not the same as being chosen, and being chosen is not the same as being owed. Teddy chose me because I never counted. That is what his letter said. And I have thought about that sentence more than any other sentence anyone has ever written to me, because it is not really about money. It is about what you see when you look at someone you love. Do you see what they are worth, or do you see who they are? Those two things feel like the same question, but they are not. They are not even close. I finished my coffee. I closed the leather box. I walked to the porch and sat in Teddy's chair, the one with the faded cushion and the armrest he had repaired with marine-grade epoxy, and a paperback copy of The Old Man and the Sea still wedged in the side pocket. The harbor was gray and still. The lobster boats were tied up for the season. A gull sat on the nearest post and watched me with one yellow eye like it had been expecting me. I listened to the waves. They came in slow and even, one after another, the way they always had. The way they did when Teddy sat here. The way they did when my grandmother wrote about the light in the kitchen. The way they would after I locked the door and drove south and went back to my life and figured out what to do with $3.8 million and a family that looked nothing like it used to. The waves did not care about any of that. They just kept coming, and there was something honest about that, something I needed. Glenn texted me that evening. He said, "How was the house?" I said it was cold. He said, "Houses get cold when no one is in them." I said, "So do families." He sent back a single period. Nothing else. I think he was saying he understood. I still have the leather box. It sits on my nightstand now. next to a lamp and a glass of water and a book I keep meaning to finish. Some nights I open it and read one of my grandmother's letters before I fall asleep. Not for information, not for evidence. Just to hear her voice in the handwriting. Just to remember that someone in my family once loved another person so completely that they wrote it down on paper and folded it carefully and kept it in a box with brass hinges for 40 years. That is what I inherited. Not $3.8 million, not a house on the water, not a rare book collection or an investment portfolio or a life insurance policy. I inherited proof that love existed. Quiet, careful, ordinary love. Written in blue ink, folded twice, kept safe. Everything else is just the argument over who deserved it. If this story made you feel something, if it made you think about someone in your own family, about trust and money, and the distance between what people say and what they do, I would be grateful if you stayed. There is a subscribe button somewhere near this voice. And if you have a story like this, one where the people you loved the most became the people you understood the least, leave it in the comments. I read every single one, because stories like these are not rare. They are just rarely told out loud.